Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this session. We are about to start. My name is Ricardo Smith with Anastasia Arensen will be your host for this session. This is an investment session, and it's about more than just returns. So looking forward to this discussion. Welcome on stage, Soli Tsi.
Okay, thank you. So just the last thing that I want to mention, I work for Sanlam, but the topic today is not to talk about Sanlam. I may quote from the company. I'll also be quoting from other companies as well. So Sanlam did a campaign this year saying that the true retirement age in South Africa has been revealed is 8 years. And I think for the people in the room, you can understand where this number comes from. So people haven't saved enough. We always communicate in terms of retirement adequacy in retirement, net replacement ratios. People don't understand that. We tried the rand and cents. People don't understand that. And we say, okay, we know that your normal retirement age is 65. You haven't saved enough. Therefore, you can only retire at 80 years old. So we're hoping that people understand this and they say, okay, how do I get my retirement age back to 65? Then you can tell them about the things that they can do. Perhaps they invested conservatively, perhaps they haven't saved enough, and perhaps there's other things here at play. If we take a step back, I found this quite interesting. The MESA CFA Institute Global Pension Index, just looking at our pension system as a whole. So they rated about just over, I think it's 60 countries from all over the world. So I also like the simplified ranking. It's intuitive. Those who get a score of 80 plus, they rated A, and those between 70 and 80 is B. So you can see where I'm going with this. That South Africa got a D, which is good because we're still getting a pass more than 50%. And the study also proposed, this study I think has been going on for about 17 years now. They also track progress. We improved a little bit from last year, and most of the countries that are tracked there, they're doing well. So no country scored an E, so all of them passed. So for South Africa, they said that we have to, if we were to improve this, we could look at a couple of things. One is looking at the minimum level of support for the poorest age individuals. And the reason that's applicable is they look at the pension fund system as a whole. So occupational pension funds, what the government is doing, and other provisions in the industry. I think some of the people will be familiar with the World Bank classification of these pension fund system. And this is something similar. And also, another thing that can improve the system is coverage. There's been a lot of talk about auto-enrollment, so that's quite key. And so we've been touching on that, and also just providing guidance in terms of how much pension fund members should contribute, perhaps including the minimum level of contribution rates. There are systems in the world, such as Australia, where that there is a form of that. But also another important factor is increasing the labor force. There's not enough coverage because of various factors, but importantly, the high unemployment rate. So you have this high unemployment rate that's leading to low savings rate. And if you have a low savings rate, you have less opportunity as a country to invest. And that leads to low economic growth. Low economic growth begets high unemployment. So it is this vicious cycle that we now find ourselves in, or the retirement industry in South Africa finding itself in the vicious cycle. Is there anything that we can do, as a retirement fund industry, along with other institutional investors, to try help break this cycle? Just maybe to bring this, an example of this is our infrastructure that is either not there, or the infrastructure that's there is collapsing. There's a big infrastructure deficit in the country, so that's one problem, or in the social context that we're facing. And, there is an opportunity here for retirement funds or role that they can play so that we move from vicious cycle to virtuous cycle. And it's in the way or the investments that the retirement funds can support. The retirement funds can support investments that have a sustainability lens or an impact lens. In South Africa, the most popular impact that people are after is job creation. So I've used that as an example. So if enough jobs are created, hopefully there's enough, there's increased retirement savings, along with other factors, and also including coverage, etc. And there's a bigger investment for the country, and then hopefully that boosts economic growth, and that leads into job creations, that virtuous cycle. It's a very simplified representation of what could happen, but I think it's a good starting point there to say, okay, where can we go? And the question is, do we have the means to do that? And everybody in the room, certainly we do have the means as retirement funds. And I'm looking at retirement, there's other institutional investors out there. So the 5.8 trillion rand cited by the FSCA on the total value of assets by a pension fund is such an opportunity. People often talk about, it's good to have a sovereign wealth fund in the country because you can invest in your infrastructure, you can invest for future generations, etc. My colleagues and I sat down and we said, look, how about we think about what we have in pension funds as a sovereign wealth fund? The difference is that this one, members have a say. The decisions there are democratized through the trustees, so you don't have one party in the sovereign wealth fund, like in the sovereign wealth fund where government makes all the decisions, and there's, in the pension fund space, you can get some efficiencies, and there is governance things that have been established there. I think another reason to look at this is just to show that we're being innovative in this space. We are using all the government or the regulatory instruments that we've been given in terms of guidance, etc. This is not a threat on prescribed assets, but the government has thought, or the ANC has thought about this a couple of times to say, should we bring back prescribed assets? Because, the regulatory instruments do say that investments that are made on behalf of the members of the pension funds have to recognize the social context they're in, the climate, etc. We know that prescribed assets is a terrible idea, thanks to ASISA that have helped us quantify in numbers what that cost retirement funds. So you can see in the 1960s, the cost was 6.4, so I know that's being exact to the decimal point, percent in real terms, and this is because pension funds could have invested in equities when you looked at the liabilities, and because the pension funds were forced to invest in bonds, in those particular bonds, then that was an opportunity cost. So you can see that the opportunity cost there was a great deal. I've touched on this slide actually when we Ricardo, you've asked me about the lenses of sustainable investing, and I was going to cover this here, but it is about a couple of different pillars. So the risk management, the opportunities that are there, the impact, the opportunities in the impact space. Just to refresh everybody's memory, I said that in the impact space, you have investments that target both the financial return and the social return, and that's a total return if you combine them. So one of the conversations that are gaining traction is that if you just look at the financial returns, you are robbing yourself because you're looking at part of the return. You should look at the return in totality. And these assets, these are very simplified, asset classes that investors can take advantage on. And of particular interest is alternative investments. So I'll dwell there a little bit, primarily private investments. If you look at the scale there, on the vertical axis, you have the level of influence that investors have to try and make impact, and also trying to control which exposures or the SDG sustainable development goals, which are impact measures, there that you can have. So alternative investments, in addition to promised higher expected returns, depending on the asset class you're looking at, those kind of investment opportunities. For those kind of investment opportunities, there is actually an opportunity to measure impact. In fact, what we've been seeing is that a lot of private funds that have been coming to the market, they've been having they've either been having impact measures as secondary objective for what they're trying to achieve, and others even coining themselves as impact funds. I think 10 years ago, when we spoke about impact funds, we were sort of thinking that, you have to sacrifice the returns, but you do have now the private equity funds. As I say, I'm an impact fund, and I'm not compromising on equity, on financial returns, etc. So this is something that pension funds need to be aware of. Going back to the regulatory instruments that we have, Regulation 28. When there was a major revamp in 2011, the explanatory memorandum said that the aim of the retirement fund investment regulation is to ensure that the savings of South Africans contribute towards the savings that the South Africans contribute towards the retirement is invested in a prudent manner. I think we're all on the same page about that. And in addition, it protects the interest, but additionally, the investments are channeled in ways that achieve economic development and growth. In the principles, the 9 principles in the Regulation 28, consideration for ESG is one of the principles there. And, this is a good guidance. It's not prescriptive. But also increasingly, we saw the regulator, FSCA, releasing a guidance note, I think it was in 2019, saying that if they were to monitor the funds, how they've done in this area, they will look at those specific factors that they have mentioned there. So there is a guidance note of 2019 that stipulates or expand on how the regulator is thinking about these things when it comes to the approach that retirement funds should take on sustainable investments, impact investments, etc. Also, just having this as one of the goals, there has been a new limits, simply increasing the upper limits within what you can invest in private equity. Remember that in private equity, that 10%, the 15% limit was competing with hedge funds. So those were decoupled, so you can invest in 15% in private equity, 10% in hedge funds. And there was also an inclusion of infrastructure just to get the conversation going about investments in this area. So it is clear that the regulator is trying to encourage pension funds to look at these types of investments, and because of various things, including economic development or thinking about the future where members are going to retire in. And we're not the only ones who are looking at these things. So if we look at what's been happening in Australia, I've just quoted 3 examples looking at specifically impact investing. You have these mega funds, they're called superannuation funds. So I think in the local context, they could be called umbrella funds, either commercial or non-commercial. So you have an Australian retirement trust that is 330 Australian dollars big. They have just recently announced an impact investing framework, and this is publicly available. There's another one, superannuation fund that is primarily in the construction business industry, called the CBUS, pledging a certain percentage, 1%, to be dedicated to climate change investment, which is a form of impact funds. Again, this is not to the exclusion of targeting adequate financial returns. Then there is a retail superannuation fund called Rest Super, where they take an interesting angle, saying, let us connect the strategies. Let us connect the investment strategy of the young members today along with the future needs when they retire in 40 years' time. Yes, they're going to need an income when they retire, but where are they going to retire? So they can invest in their future directly. I think we can also take comfort that South Africa is not alone grappling with these issues. Even in countries as developed or having pension fund systems as developed as Australia, they're still grappling with this, but they're still going somewhere. Impact investing is still being seen as a niche, and for a couple of factors. I think one of the factors is confusion as to what impact investing is. People thinking that you have to sacrifice financial returns. There has been a couple of studies supported by the government to say, how do we make impact investing mainstream? But one of the things that come up in Australia is that for the pension fund members there, it is quite possible for a retirement fund member to look at an airport, for example, for a road, and to be able to say, my pension fund invested, contributed there. And we've done that in South Africa before. We've built N3 as roads. We've supported other infrastructure, other types of infrastructure, renewables, etc. So this is happening in South Africa. So let's look at how pension funds are invested. Maybe other people in the room, their pension funds are different from the average that I am showing here, but this is an average. This comes from Alex Forbes' effective asset allocation survey, and also, for the global institutional investors, we took study done by UBS. And pension funds are underinvested in this area because many of the pension funds implement the investment strategies using balanced funds. There are others, I'll show later, that invest, in a specialist manner where they have fixed asset allocation. Typically, those are larger funds with more governance budgets. But an average pension fund in South Africa is underinvested when you look at the portion in alternatives. And if you break that down, you can see that this includes hedge funds, this includes private equity, etc. So the public pension fund in South Africa, the PIC, is leading the way. There is a meaningful allocation in alternatives, but we compared this with other long-term institutional investors. They have meaningful allocation into alternatives because they are long-term in nature. Yes, we don't have to go to the 40% or the 95% that I've mentioned there, but certainly the answer is not 2.8%. There is some work that has been done by the pension funds clubbing together and say, can we do something? And why it was important for the pension funds to club together, call themselves Asset Owners Forum of South Africa, and the auspices of BASITA, is that knowledge sharing is important when it comes to these kind of investments. You tend to need specialist knowledge. It has, there is cost in terms of evaluating these types of investments, doing investment due diligence, etc. I think some of the people who have an experience in this manner will know that you also have to pay for legal fees sometimes to review these agreements. And also, the minimum required investments are quite high. So I argue that even for a 5 billion rand fund, to be investing directly in these type of investments, requires a higher governance budget, and diversification is quite difficult to achieve if the minimum investment is 100 million. But trustees of the pension funds, they want these types of investments when you talk to them. So this also came up in the Sanlam benchmark survey that we did in 2020, this year, that the trustees and also the principal officers of the pension funds, they would like to be invested in these. And top of their list was investments that support education, skills development, healthcare, well-being, job creation. And job creation was by far a measure that the pension fund trustees were interested in. So this is just another graph. This is a graph that shows the results of the survey in another form. There's also a talk of the investment opportunities that are available throughout the country. I've listed a couple that I've come across just in terms of the funds that I've been able to see. So yes, you do have investment opportunities in Gauteng. They're doing well. All the investments that are listed there, they're achieving the objectives. I think what's important there is to look at the provinces that are listed there. So there is a Limpopo, Mpumalanga. So it's across all the country. There's, investment opportunities. Across the country, over all the provinces, and they may be different from province to province. And why this is important, remember that members of retirement funds come from from various places around the country. So if you just concentrate, or as a pension fund, at a pension fund system level, if we only concentrate on urban areas, we are missing opportunities to make members' lives better. Taking into account where they could possibly retire to. Just a final slide, call this call to action. This is simply saying let us start having those discussions based on those observations that I've shared and also the observations that other people in the room have shared. So retirement funds have a part to play in improving the system as a whole. So the simplified framework that I've shared, hopefully that sheds light, and then they can influence and shape where members will retire to, the environment into which members will retire, including influencing, job creation in South Africa, economic development in South Africa, or growth, etc. So my view is that, and the view of my colleagues, and some of my colleagues are specialists in this area, is that sustainable investing is not a nice to have. And I think there's an opportunity here to reframe the fiduciary duty of the people who are responsible for these investments, the service providers to pension funds in this area. So it would be great to see, retirement funds investments of an average South African being invested in a prudent manner and also ensuring adequate income. But also it's important to note that we have an opportunity to channel the capital that is made available by retirement funds in ways that improve economic growth. So I'd like to stop here and see if we still have an opportunity to engage.
Thanks. So we are, running over. This session was scheduled to end now at 9:15. So what I'll do is, there's a refreshment break for the next hour starting now that's sponsored by the IAA. And there's an inside chess tournament at 9:20. Maybe, I don't know, you could be one of the chess finalists. If you do have capacity for additional 5 minutes for Q&A, but also allowing those who either want to go to the refreshment break or the chess tournament to attend that. So it's not one option, it's not mutually exclusive, you can choose. So I'll allow those who want to attend the chess tournament and those who want to get a refreshment break to exit the room because of time, and then engage at during the conference or at a later stage. And I don't know, Tia, if you do have 5 minutes for Q&A?
Yeah,
yes.
You actually do, because if I'm looking at the clock, you do have about 6 minutes. So we did add a bit of time due to the fact that we didn't have your presentation, which we apologize for. But we do have 6 minutes to take some audience Q&A, so I'm not sure who wants to take that opportunity to engage.
Yeah. Just to be clear, we have 6 minutes in this room, so
Yeah.
We're in our own time capsule, but the rest occurs.
So there's a question there at the back.
Thanks. Solly, you mentioned that trustees are keen to invest in these areas because they want to make an impact. What things do you think the industry can do to make it easier for the trustees and pension funds to be able to do it? Because you mentioned, for example, there's these very long legal documents that need to be reviewed, which cost a lot of money, and they're hundreds of pages in length. What do you think the industry can do to assist? Thanks.
Thanks for the question, and I think the way you ask it demonstrate that you have seen these volumes of papers that trustees have to go through, or the service providers. So there's a couple of things that trustees can do, or the industry can do. So that speaks to access. It means that it is a bit difficult for trustees to access these types of investments. And one of the discussions in the industry was, how do we democratize access? In the listed space, we've been able to do that. We've been clever by having pooled funds, so the trustees don't have to, just spend lots of time looking at the listed assets, but there's specialist investment service providers there. So democratizing access in terms of lowering the minimums that are there, because the minimums are there for a reason, and also just making sure that we come up with innovative ways of taking that burden away from the trustees and to some sort of a service providers. I mean, one example is we do have fund of funds infrastructures. Why can't we have that in the space where you have a specialist that are looking at the private market funds and simplifying this process for retirement funds? So the retirement fund can assess, or along with the investment advisors, assess the fund of fund structure. And the fund of fund structure can look at the individual thing, and also it also speaks to what other countries have done, but it speaks more on the retail side. But this is something that can also be applicable on the institutional side. So in the UK, you have what is called the long-term asset funds. So these are funds that are heavily invested in private markets, but in a diversified manner. But they also combine that with listed investments. So that's also another way of taking the burden of decisions from investors and putting it back to the service providers, and rather assess that service provider to be able to help you. So those are some of the things that can be done. Another thing is just sharing knowledge. So what the Asset Owners Forum has done is commendable. We need more of those. Maybe the club can be a bit bigger. And then also just being innovative on, is there an opportunity for technology to play a role here? Can those kind of, assessing the agreements, can technology play a role there in automating some of those things, so that people spend time applying their minds, judgment, discretion from investment evaluation point of view, rather than doing the necessary but tedious work of going through those things. So those are some of the things that come to mind.
There's a question there. Okay. There is someone who can see you.
There was another one at the front. Yeah.
No, thanks, Solomon, for a good presentation. It's more of a comment than anything. So just a comment on the democratization, as you mentioned. So just some updates on that part is, some of the thinking around infrastructure investment, right? So there would be, I would say, some movement in, like listing infrastructure bonds, right? That would make it a bit more accessible for long-term investors, especially pension funds, to start investing in that space. There's also a growing, I'd say, maturity in the thinking of around using the REIT vehicle to invest in infrastructure. So both have a debt and equity approach to investing in infrastructure. In other parts of the world, there's a use of REIT vehicles to invest in infrastructure. In South Africa, we only use it to invest in property. And then the last comment there would be around prescription. So in other parts of the world, particularly in the UK, there's the Mansion Accords, which, there's many things that are being done there. But the main thing, there's what they call mandation, right? And what mandation basically is doing is prescription. And that's happening right now, where UK pension funds are being directed to invest a minimum a minimum proportion in real assets. Think about 10%, and 5% is in the UK, right? So that's what's happening at the moment. So hopefully we don't get there, but that's what's happening in terms of investing in infrastructure and things like that. Thanks.
Thanks. I think those are good insights to share, and thank you for kindly sharing those. Really appreciate. Thank you.
Hi, Jock here. Just the last question. Thank you for the presentation, quite interesting. I think we also have a competing market actually with online gambling currently in South Africa. I've seen a very interesting stat recently that almost 50% of your income in South Africa is almost contributed to online gambling. So do you think there's anything or regulations that should be put in place to almost curb that? Because I think unemployment is obviously a big factor for not contributing to these funds, but I think with the massive gambling problem in South Africa, it's obviously not making the situation better.
Sure, that's an interesting question. I don't know if in gambling, are you including crypto, Bitcoin, but anyway. I think it's difficult to regulate those kind of things, but there's an opportunity again here, looking at some of the frameworks that we have. Two-pot, for example. There was a study in the UK, and there's a gentleman, I must thank Rian for sharing the study from the UK, where they piloted two-pot study. So what they found is that once people knew that they could access a portion of their money, they actually invested more. So it means that that capital was diverted from somewhere into this space. So even in South Africa now, I think the two-pot system balances the long-term needs, but also accessibility of that funds quite nicely. So instead of people gambling, maybe we can sell them that, why don't you put this into your retirement funds pot and look at the total returns that we are offering. Online gambling, it's financial returns. Are there social returns? Probably not. Here's a higher return opportunity that you can invest in that will also address the environment where you live. So these kind of questions are very interesting, and this is what members actually are grappling with. Hopefully that goes some way of addressing that, what you've just asked.
Thanks. We are out of time, even in our own time capsule. The statistician in me must state, although after the fact, that for those who do choose, it is mutually exclusive. But as a collective, it's not. At 10:20, there's the plenary, so the presidential address in the ballroom. I think the chess tournament is still happening, so you could potentially still catch a bit of it. Thanks. Tia, apologies for the technical glitches, and thanks for your flexibility and your patience. Thank you.
Thank you.